Welcome back. Well, yes, as you've seen there, we've got Mr. Paul Igbenogba joining us. Yes, he is an economist and a business consultant. He's also the team lead, ProServe Options Consulting. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Well, you know, there's a World Bank report which says that in 2022, Nigeria is expected to have one of the highest inflation rates in the world and 7th highest in sub-Saharan Africa. Not data that we're happy to read out, you know, but it's a stark reality that stares us in the face. And they did also go on to suggest some short-term measures that could be adopted in the next 6 months to get us some sort of results. But you know, when we talk about the economy, we know that different governments, this one, they've been battling for decades to get our inflation rate to a single digit. But we know where we still are today. Still a far cry from what it should be or what the targets or what they set as targets. So you've seen some of these policies implemented over time. So yes, they say you know what a bank can do by what is done before. Does that apply with economics and how we handle ourselves here?
Well, the problem with our economy, I think we know what the problems are. We know what are the key drivers of inflation in Nigeria. Essentially is the exchange rate management problem, that's one of it. Secondly is the funding of, the huge federal budget deficits, which is funded through ways and means. Ways and means essentially means monetary funding of deficit. And that means the central bank literally prints naira to fund trillions of dollars, trillions of naira of annual federal government budgets.
Is that sustainable?
That deficits. Well, it's not sustainable. I mean, ordinarily, it's okay if the government goes to the central bank to fund its deficit occasionally, all right, and in a way that is sustainable, in a way that is within recommended, ratios. For example, the annual budget deficit shouldn't exceed 5% of the GDP, all right? But ours, I think this year probably 5.7 or thereabout. So when government funds its deficit through ways and means, through monetary funding, that's through central bank printing of naira, it puts huge pressure on inflation rate, and also by extension on exchange rate. If that is done occasionally and done in a way that is sustainable, in other words, it's not so huge, it's okay. But when it becomes an annual recurring event and in huge values of trillions of naira, it then constitutes one of the huge pressures, one of the major sources of pressures on interest rate, on inflation, on the exchange rate, on interest rate.
Let me ask you this broad-based question. What is it about the economy? Why does it appear as though, we can't seem to place our finger on it and address its issues?
Well, the economy is not really, the management of our economy really is not rocket science. Agreed, it's not, ABC or like a cup of tea. But at the same time, there's nothing that has happened in the last few years that are so extraordinary, so unusual, that it's not happening elsewhere in the world, all right? So the basic problem with our economy and its management is the policy options, or the lack of it, of the government. And basically, one of the thematic aspects of this regime is populism. In the management of the economy is just one word: populism, all right? Trying to please people, sound popular, this aspirational, you know, way of saying, well, we don't want people to suffer, quote unquote, all right? But see, the best way to help the people and the poor is not by controlling prices. And that's essentially what government is doing, you know, because if you look at it, what they're doing is controlling prices.
How?
Either of exchange rate or of PMS, that's petrol price, all right? And when you control prices, that doesn't really help the economy.
So, what steps?
So the best way to manage an economy, manage a free enterprise economy, is to allow market forces to determine prices.
So what key steps?
Hold on. And so what government does essentially is to just provide the enabling environment and the right policies, so that people, let economic actors be the one to make decisions. And so through interplay of supply and demand forces, and when you say supply and demand, actually you're referring to individual actors who are coming to the market either to supply or to buy and sell based upon the information they've had, which is in line with their desire to either make a profit or to maximize their own consumption benefits. So what I'm saying is this. It is economic actors, either as buyers, either as entrepreneurs, investors, suppliers, producers, who are in the best place to make decisions that can influence prices.
Okay.
And give you a price that is realistic and that will make every sector, every market to operate optimally.
So,
but when government intervenes because it wants to help the masses, they don't want people to suffer, it disrupts the whole...
So what are those interventions that you're speaking about?
It destroys the whole market mechanism.
Yeah, tell us about those
problems.
interventions that you are referring
For example,
to that makes them control price.
The price of petrol. All right? That's a price ceiling. That's price control. Of course, we know it's not entirely that simple. It's not as if government really wants to control prices. I mean, there's a whole lot of political pressure, all right, and resistance from labor and from some other stakeholders. But you see, we've been on this petrol subsidy thing for so long, all right? So it is time Nigeria had, well, that's Nigeria, all of us, the government, takes a decision to really solve that problem. Well, thank God we have the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act has provided for that. I mean, all right? I mean, so now, government is committed. I mean, government has no choice, or we have no choice. If we want to obey that act, then sometime this year, probably before the second quarter of this year, the petrol subsidy would have been removed. Okay, but it is coming almost too late. It's coming so close to election. So that in itself will create problems. But we didn't have to wait for the PIA to actually address the issue of petrol subsidy.
So what would you say to someone who listens to you, who's listening to you and thinks, okay, well, if you say they are controlling prices in that sector, talking about deregulation and things like that, oil prices, what about the food and beverage industry? Look at the prices of foodstuffs out there. It's over the roof. Are they controlling prices there?
Well, government is not controlling prices of food and all that. But that's the irony. If you really want to help the people, all right, you should be trying to control price of staples so that people don't suffer.
Oh, so they can control some prices.
That is what the people really, spend their money on, all right? But you want to control the price of PMS, which the masses don't really consume in huge quantity. The people that benefit from...
How did you come to that conclusion?
Hold on. The people that benefit from fuel subsidy are largely the rich, the middle class, those who own cars, and the rich. Now, the current World Bank study, the Nigeria Development Update, NDU, of November, okay, came out with a report that only 3% of the poor benefits from petrol subsidy. Only 3%. So, which means that 97% of petrol subsidy benefits the rich and the middle class, and benefits business people, smugglers,
In other words,
illegal and criminal operators.
If that is the case, sir, how come the labor unions kick against PMS?
They're only just an ideological fixation. That's just it.
What does that mean?
That means that they just feel that petrol price should go up because it's our, it's our right. We produce petrol. It's our benefit. Why should our people suffer and pay a higher price for petrol? It's just an ideological fixation. It has nothing to do with economic sense of reality. Because if the behavior and attitude and position of labor is based on reality, it will be data-driven. It's not data-driven. The facts are there, and the empirical evidence, the facts are there. Only 3% of the poor in Nigeria benefit from petrol subsidy.
We've been talking about this, just as you said, we've been talking about this removal of petrol subsidy for quite a while now.
For decades.
Exactly. Now, if it's as you say, how come all of the economists, all of the governments from one government to the other have not been able to convince labor to look at this realistic data that you say?
You see, actually, the way I say it is insufficient political will to manage this issue. It can be managed. For example, if a company realizes, a management and the board realizes that this company will go under if we don't downsize and send some people away, all right? What would they do? They just have to do the right thing. But then in doing it, they do it with a human face. You give those people who have to go a handsome handshake, all right, and a soft landing. So you can negotiate with labor. You can negotiate with any group of stakeholders who are opposing. It's a matter of how you negotiate and what you do to them. What's important is that at the end of the day, all stakeholders are happy. Okay. So now, what is being proposed, which is realistic, is that 3,000 some money will be given to some selected, targeted poor people when the petrol subsidy is removed. Well, that makes sense. Though the issue of how you do it is a question, but it can be done.
In other words, you're saying that they should go ahead and remove it. After all, it's only 3% of the population that benefit from
and
it.
Then
whether or not the prices go high or not, it's just 3% of the people.
You see, we don't have any choice. Otherwise, this economy can go under. We'll have a public finance crisis that of such a huge dimension that will just affect everything. So government has no choice now but to remove the petrol subsidy. But then what they can do in the short term is to determine categories of population of the poor who you give some cash transfers to mitigate the effect on them.
Just the same 3%?
Well, not necessarily the 3%, but
why give 3% if you say it's only 3% that benefit from fuel subsidy?
No, absolutely. Research shows that only 3% of the poor benefit, all right? But when government is not determining who and who, it will be people of a certain level of income level.
That's why
of a certain income level. It's not going to be so straightforward, but that is what they will do, and that's what we should do. Of course, there are other ways. You can provide vehicles, give transporters opportunity to buy vehicles at a subsidized rate and all that. There are many things government can do.
But Mr. Gwenova, I think that data needs to be interrogated.
No,
because
that is the reality.
Just a minute, because the thing is, I mean, which part or sector of this country's economy, small shops, lock-up shops, SMEs, don't power their generator? We all know we don't have power supply, uninterrupted power supply. So everybody will power all of those things. The small industry, the small shops, whatever is it out there, they rely on fuel supply to run or power. Services rely on that. So how is it that we say
but
only
those,
the rich benefits from this?
Those SMEs you're talking about, they are not the poor, quote unquote. They still are able to make a profit and make ends meet, all right? They are not the real poor. But
so who are the poor? The person that fries akara, what do they work with then?
Even the woman that fries akara, it's not the typical poor because they really make money.
So who is
we have none of women who train their children to university through frying akara. All right? The real poor, ironically, most of them don't even live in the urban areas. They live in the rural areas, and most of them don't use transportation.
Now, to try to move forward now, Mr. Abinova, there are a number of recommendations which my colleague referenced earlier that the World Bank is making.
Yes.
One of them is the one that you've just spoken about, which is removing this fuel subsidy thing, which, of course, a good number of people are still wondering how government is going to get that done. But there are a number of other recommendations that have been made along that line. So one is just wondering here now how those things are going to play out, especially in favor of the economy of the nation. For instance, we talk about reducing inflation through a coordinated mix of exchange rate and all of those things.
Exactly. Now,
So,
hold on. Now, you discover that fuel subsidy impacts inflation heavily. All right? It's a great source of I mean, it impacts government spending. It leads to the huge budget deficit, which is financed through ways and means, through monetary funding by central bank. That's printing of naira. Those trillions of naira of annual printing of naira puts a huge pressure on inflation. That's one. Two, the control of exchange rate. That's another price control. The way the central bank manages the exchange rate are not allowing free market forces to determine the exchange rate.
What should they do?
It's a price control, all right? And that price control, when you control prices...
No, what should they ideally do?
Just let me tell you, when you control price, and the price you are set is below the price that will encourage suppliers, supply reduces, all right? So in this manner, now, the price control in the foreign exchange market has led to the drying up of inflow of dollars. Essentially, that's because the official rate, now the current official rate is about, as at the end of last month, of December 31st last year, was 435 naira to a dollar in the official NAFEX market, all right? But in the black market or pilot market, it was 560. So there's a huge premium.
Yeah, but
all right?
as we wind down, tell us, Mr. Abinova.
And because of those two rates...
Talk about solutions. What should they do that they've not done?
The solution is, like I said, allow market forces to determine prices either in foreign exchange market, either in PMS, as well as...
Concerning the dollar exchange rate.
The ideal thing is for government acting to central bank to, as quickly as possible, transit to a free market. Let NAFEX be a free market so that the central bank will stop the intervention. Once there's a free market, you discover that the gap between the official exchange rate, the NAFEX rate, and the parallel market will collapse. And the difference will not be more than, ideally, 5%. And once that happens, I can tell you, you will see a huge inflow of dollars. You see foreign direct investment coming in huge numbers. You see portfolio investment, those who invest in the stock market, coming. That's how it was years ago. And once that happens, the naira will stabilize and will even improve. And so the inflationary pressure from the foreign exchange market will reduce to the barest minimum. And now, talking about government subsidy, the reason why government is spending so much money is because government is doing things that it shouldn't be doing. That's because government is not willing to privatize. if government privatizes, for example, the power sector, for example, government has some business, spending huge amount of money. Privatize the sector. Let that.
Well, I thought we've done
No.
some privatization in that sector.
That was done before this regime came in. Right now,
It's still government.
right now, there are about 10 power plants in the Nigeria power plants that are stranded. Those plants were to be privatized in 2014. They have still not been privatized. If those plants are privatized and then other foreign investors coming to build new plants, that will take care of our power supply. But government isn't allowing that. So that's why they spend too much money in the power sector. So what I'm saying briefly is that privatize the economy and therefore reduce government spending on things that can be done by the private sector.
Mr. Budaba, I know that...
and that will minimize your need to borrow excessively.
We're out of time because there's several areas that need a lot of clarification and interrogation of some of the issues you raised about portfolio investment and dollar rates will drop if CBN hands off certain things. We've seen these things before, how people will still clamor. Wait, let them rein in these figures because, look, if you don't address manufacturing, how you... But, look, that's just how far we can go, unfortunately.
The
we need to go, Mr.
sorry, the summary of the law is that.
Yeah, we already had the summary, pardon me. Really sorry about that. Mr. Populism is an economist and a business consultant, team lead of ProServe Options Consulting. Thank you very much indeed for your time today, sir.